foam-flinging toys, the shelf space is getting a little bit crowded. Sure, we've got Nerf, which is pretty much the ubiquitous brand, but there's also stuff like Buzzbee, Dart Zone, Adventure Force, Stats Blaster, Air Zone, and even stuff like Exploders, and all these other things have gone by the wayside, and I think the newest casualty of that, of course, is probably Boomco, which, besides a couple of blasters at Target, and then some of the Halo stuff at Toys R Us, they're really, really hard to find now. In fact, I have not seen any Boomco stuff in any Walmart for a very long time. Which is a shame, because if you happen to like stuff like that, well, it's completely gone. But even in Nerf's own ecosystem, we've seen quite a few different ammo types just straight up disappear for whatever reason, whether they needed the more shelf space for another more popular line, or they just didn't see it selling all that well. And I guess those two things could be kind of correlated together, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm Walcom S7, and welcome to Tag Back, the show where every week we take a look at another blaster from the past to see what it could offer us today in the present. And today we're going to be talking about Vortex. These things, and these are a little old. I think the line's pretty much been dead since 2014 with the Fuse Fire. And that was a few years ago. We're almost in 2017. And the brand kind of started with these things in 2012. And honestly, I kind of liked them. The main reasoning for that is that discs were fun. They're very easy to stuff in your pocket. They don't get damaged or anything like that. And they flew rather well. In fact, at the time, this is kind of when Dart Tag and stuff was around and Elite was just starting to come out. Well, these things kept up with Elite blasters, but they had some shortcomings. The biggest of which is that they're kind of hard to modify. In fact, I don't really know anybody who's ever modified a Ravonix 360. And trust me, I've opened it up to even take a look at it because I wanted to have that claim to fame. And I mean, we're talking about a blaster that when you pump it, it rotates a cylinder, feeds a disc in like this up to here, and switches it from vertical to horizontal, and then, yeah, all in one pumping motion, and that's kind of why it feels like garbage when you pump it. But there was a blaster before the Ravonix 360 that was kind of a lot cooler, and that was the Vortex Pyragon. Pyragon? The Thing. It's a really cool blaster. It's one I happen to like quite a bit. Out of the box, it was probably everybody's favorite in the entire Vortex line, and it was one of the few blasters that even people who dislike Vortex completely couldn't hate. It is an amazing blaster. It's really good, and we'll get to why, but this thing looks pretty darn goofy, and first reasoning for that is this, which is the Pyragons or Pyragons. I'm going to say Pyragon. I guess that's probably the correct pronunciation, but I'm sure somebody will yell at me about it in the comments. This is its 40-disc drum. 40. It's not even that big. I mean, yeah, it's pretty big, but all things considered, it's really, really nice looking. It's got this clear window right there. And then, of course, yeah, 40 discs. That is not a small number. That is a very large number. So if you had a Pyragon and the 40 discs that came with this thing, and again, these things are nigh indestructible. They're really hard to break, so chances are if you can find them, you can reuse them. And then you have this thing, and it is a doozy. And the funny thing about this is how it reloads. It's really interesting. It's a mechanism that I don't think would work with any other thing, sans maybe Rival, but right here, if you look at the side of the drum, it says 1 right there. And if you notice, I pretty much got this thing full up. I might be able to fit one more disc in there, but let's not, you know, kind of just ram them in there. We don't want to jam it all up, but it says 1 right there. And once you've got this initial stack full, what you do is you flip this little lever right here, and you'll see that when I do that, it switches to 2, and that will now travel down quite a bit, and you'll lose a disc. But the point is that you fill this up and you do it all the way to 4, then you put it back in the Pyragon, and there's a little, or Pyragon, I can't even, is it Pyragon or Pyragon? I can't even tell anymore. These names are so confusing sometimes. There's a little switch right here that says unload, which is how you kind of unload the blaster. There's a spring that obviously catches every single time you rotate that, but when this gets pressed down, it releases all of those, which allows you to unload the drum. Or in this case, when you load it into a blaster, that switch automatically gets pressed down, as you can see right here. Notice it's pressed down, and that means that this thing can freely spin as discs are emptied, and that's where the Pyragon comes in. Now, of course, this will work with basically any of the Vortex blasters that use the magazine system, but these ones, Pyragon's got it good. What made it so good was its just buttery smooth slam fire, to the point where people would have contests to see how fast you could empty one of these 40-round drums. And trust me, you could do it pretty darn fast. It's a really interesting thing. Now, I'm gonna kind of shoot towards the camera here. You just hold down the trigger like any other slamfire blaster and pump it, and every single time you bring the pump forward, it will fire a disc, like so. I'm gonna lose a lot of these discs. Let's shoot it over here. But the point is that every single time you do that, it's kind of a, except for the time where, you know, these old blasters kind of jam, it's a really, really easy, buttery smooth, almost no resistance system. And that's one of the reasons why people just love this blaster so much. The drum, maybe not so much. The drum has its issues. A lot of the major issues I've seen is that it's too heavy. So even when I was using it at something like Dart Wars, well, it's kind of an issue because it would end up falling out if you hit it against something, or if it, for whatever reason, it's just the catches on these things aren't very strong and the drums would fall out. And they had a tendency to jam, like trying to feed, not a huge tendency, I guess you wouldn't even call it a tendency, but it had occasional jam, which was a little bit of annoying. And when it came down to the war between discs and darts, well, dart blasters are a heck of a lot easier to modify, and a lot of people didn't like the idea that they couldn't use their original Nerf darts in these things. Which is kind of weird because everybody pretty much had to buy new darts anyway when the Elite line came out, so I don't see what the big issue is. But what do I know? This gets some pretty good ranges. I want to see around 65 feet, maybe 70. Most of these things, when you use the discs, that they have a decent initial velocity. It's much lower than a dart, probably around the 50-55 FPS mark. But since they're discs, after a little while, I'd say 25-30 feet, they kind of catch the wind and sail off in their own direction. But that made them really predictable when you're firing them, so they're really not that good for straight-up combat unless you're close range, and the discs being wider than darts are kind of hard to dodge compared to a standard Nerf dart. But you got really good at banking these shots, and of course you can do all sorts of crazy stuff like bounce them off walls, bounce them off corners, you can bank them off the ground, they would hit the ground and skip back up and keep going. Really, really fun blasters, and there's so many trick shots you can do. And now you can't because Vortex is gone. In fact, the Fuse Fire was the last blaster in the Vortex line, which was in the Zombie Strike line, and that came out after the Revonix 360, and then kind of the redux of the Diatron or Diatron, whatever the heck it's called. I can never remember. These blasters are so weird. The Proton, and then of course the Praxis, which is a pump action blaster similar to this, except for it does not have any kind of slam fire. Now, these did get overall kind of lower ranges compared to other Vortex blasters, and it could be modified, but it couldn't be modified quite as much because it has the slam fire mechanism, which made it a little more brittle, especially with how strong those torsion springs could get. The Praxis was a little bit more reliable because it was just, you know, pump and go, and it was a lot beefier system. If you remove the locks, which were like the first thing that ever broke in the thing, trust me, if you do not remove the locks in your Praxis, you're probably going to break it. Then once you got that and you retorsion the spring, you had a very powerful blaster. And then when it comes to the Pyragon, well, it can still kind of do it, but I haven't seen a whole lot of people do it because I think they have a tendency to jam. Now, this front grip right here is one of the most comfortable front grips I've ever seen, but unfortunately it's on I don't know, $50 blaster when it first came out, and I bought mine at Toys R Us for that exact price. So it's not really something I ever really want to tear off, but it is very, very comfortable, kind of like a P90 style grip. The grips back here, they were always very large and easy to grab. I mean, look at this thing. You can see it's so much room. It wasn't uncomfortable for anybody, including kids. Big, huge tack rail on top of it, which there weren't really too many of the tactical accessories for the top rail. There was the Praxis had the stock, which would of course go on the stock attachment point right here, and then there was the Nitron scope, which we'll cover in a later episode. But I mean, you could put like a shield on it or something. It does have that, it does have the top rail, it does not have a barrel attachment obviously because of course it's meant to shoot those discs. And if you weren't understanding how these things actually fire, when you prime them back, there's an arm that actually gets cocked back like that, and there's a little hook on it, and then when a disc is in the chamber, it hooks just under that disc and then it flings it forward like that. Really interesting system. They weren't that hard to mod, but they were a lot more brittle than standard foam. And I think that's one of the reasons why we just don't see Vortex anymore, which is a shame because, again, I love them, and I'll cover a lot more videos on them in the future. But let me know what you think about the Pyragon, and better yet, the Vortex line, down in the comment boxes below. And of course, if you like them, hit the like button, and if you dislike them, the dislike button is there as well. And let me know why you dislike them, because honestly, I never really understood it. A lot of people just did not like them. Oh, they're terrible because I have to go buy new darts and I don't want to, but you still had to do that anyway because you had a bunch of streamlines, and streamlines weren't going to work in your elite stuff, so I don't really understand it. I'm Walcom S7, thank you very much for watching this video, and of course I hope to see you in an entirely different one.